Hi, welcome back to the channel. This video is another update on the situation in Russia. And what I'm trying to focus in on these videos is the real life impact of what's going on in Ukraine right now in terms of the financial impacts, on business impacts, and the global economy impacts. So today I'm looking at a variety of things that have come through over the last few days that are now starting to have a real cash impact on businesses. So I'll walk you through a variety of information today. We'll look at what's happening with MasterCard and Visa, who've now joined in with the sanctions side of things. So they're now preventing payments being made. So that's having an impact on a variety of different businesses. I'll talk about some of the oil companies who have joint venture agreements with some of the Russian businesses, and they've made statements with regards to what they're going to do on those joint ventures. I'll talk to you about air traffic because there have been some massive implications over the last few days on air travel. So we're looking at bans across the whole of Europe for Russian carriers. We're looking at bans over Russia now for European carriers, but we're also looking at cancellations of flights and issues with logistics and transfer of freight. So there's a variety of issues that relate directly to the problems with airspace. I'll talk to you about what's going on in banking because there is a Russian bank that owns a variety of branches all across Europe, and that bank is now in severe difficulty, and that's causing major problems for all of the customers of those banks, and they're now potentially at risk of that bank going completely bust. I'll talk to you about the vehicle manufacturers. Obviously, a lot of vehicle companies export into Russia, but there's also some joint venture agreements in Russia, so we'll have a quick look at that. And then I'll talk to you about what's happening with regards to social media, the entertainment business, and wealth fund managers, because a lot of money is invested in Russia and Russian companies. And all of these wealth management businesses are now making decisions as to whether or not those investments will continue or whether they're now divesting of all of their Russian assets. And then finally today, I'll finish up with my overview as to what I think is likely to happen here. We're starting to see the impact of this crisis on businesses, and that is going to get a lot worse over the next 3 to 6 months. So I'll talk to you about what I think is going to happen and whether or not this could cause another global financial crisis. But before we get into all of that, if I could ask you at some point during this video to give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content, and also to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And don't forget that I always include chapters in my videos, so it makes it really easy to skip over a section if you're not particularly interested in it, or you can go straight to a particular topic if that's the one that you really want to focus in on today. Both MasterCard and Visa have announced that they have now imposed restrictions on transactions from certain financial institutions with regards to what's going on with the crisis in Ukraine. Now, this is big news because previously we were just talking about the sanctions being taken at governmental level. So they were blocking certain financial institutions from being able to make payments and to use the SWIFT system. And they were also blocking the Russian central bank from accessing its reserves. But MasterCard and Visa are more operational. So these are individual payments that companies and individuals are trying to make. And the fact that they have now blocked all of these transactions means that we've got an effective barrier to doing business. So companies who want to buy and sell things, who are on the restricted list, will no longer be able to do any sort of business whatsoever. So this will have a negative impact on the economy because these transactions are purchases. So a lot of Russian businesses will be buying things and those purchases will no longer be able to proceed. So we'll see a direct loss of income and profit from the companies who are doing trade with these Russian entities. But we'll also see a loss at the MasterCard and Visa level because these companies take a percentage transaction fee for all transactions. So you can start seeing now and getting a feel for why these bans are going to have a knock-on impact to the global economy. Because at every single point, somebody would have been making money on these deals and they're no longer making that profit. So the ripple effect of that will feed through into the global economy really quickly. Russia is one of the largest producers of oil in the world. It's either ranked second or third, depending on what metric you look at. I won't make a decision on that because no doubt I'll get lots of comments below from people saying it isn't one or the other. But I'll just tell you that it's a really big producer of oil. It also has really big reserves of natural gas. And natural gas is really important to a lot of countries, including Turkey and Germany, because Russia have pipelines that feed that gas directly into those countries, and those countries then use it to produce electricity in their nation. So it's a really important player in the global energy market. And because of its rich reserves, a lot of energy companies around the world have joint venture arrangements in place with Russia to help them develop their oil fields and natural gas, and they then make profit from that. So a number of the big oil companies have come out over the last few days and made statements as to what their position is with regards to dealing with Russia going forward. Shell have announced that they will be exiting from all of their Russian investments. These include a 27.5% stake in a liquefied natural gas plant in Japan, a 50% stake in the Salem petroleum development, and the Geiden energy venture, which are both owned by Russian giant Gazprom. And it will also exit entirely from the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline, which is a 750-mile long pipeline that has been laid from Russia to Germany. And it's reported that Shell have invested over $1 billion into that project. The total value of the investments in Russia as of the end of 2021 on Shell's balance sheet was over $3 billion. And it's unknown whether or not they will get any of that value back or whether they might have to write off the full $3 billion. Now, this has caused the Shell share price to fall because it's not just about these investments in Russia. These reserves form a big part of the Shell reserves going forward. So this was future value and future profit for Shell. They were looking to develop these joint ventures with their Russian counterparts over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So by pulling out of this, this is going to damage Shell's business model going forward because they now have a much smaller amount of oil and gas to develop. The Japanese liquefied natural gas development also has two Japanese investors, Mitsui and Mitsubishi, who own a total of 22.5% between them. Now, no statement has been issued as to what they will be doing categorically, but they are both reviewing whether or not they want to continue with that investment. And this field has a lot of natural gas reserves, and most of it is being exported to Japan and China. So this is a really valuable asset. This would have been something that was a long-standing investment for all of these counterparties, but because of the conflict and because of Russia's political intentions, all of these parties are now looking to exit potentially. But Shell have definitely stated that they will be exiting and they'll no longer be involved in any of these projects. BP, one of the other major international oil businesses, whose chief executive is rather amusingly called Bernard Looney. BP have had a 30-year relationship in Russia and own 19.75% of Rosneft. And in its latest accounts, the oil fields in Russia account for around about 1/3 of the total reserves for BP. Well, BP have now announced that they are exiting from Russia and they will be selling their stake in Rosneft. There's no update in terms of any deal that's been struck and any potential buyer for those shares, but BP is potentially looking at a $25 billion write-off if it cannot recover the value of that investment. But the more damaging impact to BP is the fact that their reserves have now reduced significantly. Russia owns a lot of oil around the world. So if you're a major oil business, then you probably would have wanted to have a stake in Russia before all of this conflict started. The fact that they're now being forced to pull out is quite a damaging impact to BP's business model and has hit the share price and is likely to hit the long-term prospects for BP because there just aren't that many undiscovered oil fields around the world. So if you're pulling out of one of the oil-rich nations, then that means that your business is likely to be smaller going forward. Equinor is a Norwegian energy business, and it has also had a 30-year relationship in Russia and has just announced that it will be exiting from that relationship and will be no longer dealing with Russian oil in the future. In its latest accounts, Equinor shows the value of its Russian investments being $1.2 billion. And again, there's no way of knowing whether or not they will recover any of that value at all. 36 countries have announced that they have closed their airspace to Russian aircraft. And these include all 27 EU countries, Canada, and a variety of Eastern European Baltic states. In response to this, Russia have now come out and announced that it has banned all aircraft from all of these 36 countries from flying over Russian airspace. In addition to these airspace bans, a number of carriers have also cancelled all of their flights to and from Russia. So we're seeing a direct closing down of all air traffic in and out of Russia and over Russia. Now, this is going to have a variety of impacts on air travel, airlines, and all associated companies. The most obvious impact is a reduction in the volume of air traffic. And clearly, this is an industry that has been struggling for some time. The impact of COVID on the airline business was massive. A lot of carriers either have gone bust or have got huge amounts of debt or national state support that they will have to pay back at some point in the future. So this industry has been struggling for some time. And as we've come away from the pandemic, we've started to see some of these businesses getting back on their feet. And this news is bad news for everybody. There are a lot of carriers in Europe that travel backwards and forwards to Russia that will be directly impacted by this. But it's not just Europe that's affected. Carriers from every single country in the world have flights every week in and out of Russia. So we'll see a loss of trade through that, but we'll also see associated cost increases because the ban from Russian airspace means that a lot of flights will now have to be diverted and will take longer to reach their destination. And we've also got an issue here that the Middle East is quite close to Russia, and a lot of carriers don't want to travel over the Middle East for security reasons. And so the diversion may be quite long and will add more in terms of the use of fuel, and it will add time in terms of the flight length. So there's a few different impacts that will all be negative for anybody involved in the air traffic business. There will also be an associated knock-on impact to related businesses, because if you're a store at one of the airports, or you're a taxi firm that takes people to and from airports, or if you're a hotel business that is looking to put up travelers, all of those businesses will be impacted because there will be less flights, there will be less people, there'll be less travelers, there'll be less need for overnight stays, there'll be less people browsing and shopping at airports. So you can start to get a feel for why the banning of airspace suddenly has an impact on the economy and how that impact can have the ripple effect, because people working in those stores or people driving taxis or working in hotels may suddenly find that they're out of work because there's just not as much demand as there was when everybody was traveling backwards and forwards to Russia all of the time. There will also be an impact on logistics and freight, because a lot of lighter items are now transported using aircraft. So if there are less aircraft travelling and they have to take longer to arrive, then that will delay the delivery of air freight, but it will also put pressure on the system because we've got capacity issues. So if there are less flights, then there's likely to be more people on those flights, and therefore the potential for putting air freight in those flights is less. And the fact that the volumes are falling will also mean that there's less options for the air freight guys to be able to put their goods and products onto those planes. There will also be logistical issues because airlines work on a very complex system of moving planes around and making sure that planes are in the right place to unload and then take on new people and move to another destination. So if you have to reduce the number of flights, or you have to change the flight times and it takes longer to arrive at a certain airport, then that means that those planes might not be in the right place at the right time for the next flight. So the logistical impact will be quite large for all of the carriers and will cause more problems and may cause a disproportionate amount of cancellations because you can't get all of the planes to be in the right place at the right time. And the final impact I wanted to highlight here is the impact on leasing companies. So the airline industry depends upon debt, and a lot of aircraft are financed using leases that are provided by third parties. Now obviously if there's a reduction in the amount of air traffic, then that means that less companies need planes, and so some of those leases may be forfeited or handed back, or it might just be that the airline is unable to pay that lease because they don't have enough cash if they're not running those planes. So that's the direct impact in terms of serviceability of that debt. But also when you look at the Russian market, Russia has 980 passenger planes, 777 of those are leased, and 515 of those leases are provided by foreign firms with a total lease value of $10 billion. Now there is now a big question mark over that 10 billion because none of those Russian planes will be able to fly in or out of Russia. So therefore they won't be generating any money, and the question is whether or not they'll be able to pay those leases. And then we have the really interesting question as to what do the lease providers do? What's their form of recourse here? In a normal set of circumstances, they could send somebody in to recover those planes if they're not being paid, but clearly at the moment nobody is going in or out of Russia, and they're certainly not going in or out of Russia to try and reclaim a plane because they wouldn't be able to fly it out of Russia, and also I don't think the Russians would be too happy with some guy turning up saying I've come to collect my 747. Now, I talked previously about banking in a previous video, and the sanctions that have been brought in against Russia will hurt the banking market in Russia. Some of the big banks have been prevented from accessing the SWIFT system, and the central bank has also been prevented from accessing its foreign reserves. But I wanted to talk today in this video about the impact on people, on the real people of the world, not just on the financial markets and all the big numbers that we talk about on this channel. I wanted to talk about the people who don't live in Russia who are now being directly impacted by this crisis. One of the banks that has been directly affected by the sanctions is SBERBANK. And this is a Russian bank. Now, SBERBANK decided it wanted to expand overseas around 10 years ago. And it bought an Eastern European bank called Volksbank. And if we have a look at this table, it shows the number of branches and customers that SBERBANK has outside of Russia. So you can see that they have 187 branches and 773,000 customers. And those customers are spread around a variety of countries, including the Czech Republic, Croatia, Hungary, Serbia, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Austria. Now, these aren't just corporate offices that are designed to help companies from Russia have banking facilities outside of the country. These are actual bank branches. These are where people are having their salaries paid into, their child benefit paying into, and they're making all of their payments for their heating and food and all of the other things that everybody needs on a daily basis. When news of Russia's invasion of Ukraine broke, queues started forming at these banks because people were worried and they wanted to withdraw all of their cash. So that led to a run on the bank. And if you're not familiar with that term, a run on the bank is when all of the customers from a bank suddenly turn up at the bank's doors and ask for all of their money back. And if you're not aware, there is not enough cash in the world to be able to satisfy everybody withdrawing all of their money from the banking system. So if you get a situation when all of the customers do turn up demanding their money, it's impossible to be able to satisfy that. And all of the countries involved here have introduced a limit in terms of how much each customer is allowed to withdraw per day. In Croatia, it was €1,000 per day. In Slovenia, it's €400, and in Austria, it is only €100. Now, this has caused mass panic, because if your salary has just been paid in at the end of the month and you need to access your cash to be able to make payments, then you're now being restricted. So this is causing real issues for real people in all of these countries. None of these people have anything to do with Russia. They are just banking with this bank that was acquired by a Russian bank 10 years ago. So this conflict isn't just impacting on corporates and large oil businesses or travel businesses, it's actually impacting on a variety of different people at all different levels for different reasons. A number of vehicle manufacturers have come out and advised that they will no longer be dealing with Russia. So we've seen from Volvo and General Motors that they will not be selling any more cars to Russia in the near term, but they're relatively small. But one company we're waiting to hear from is Ford, because Ford has 3 joint venture plants in Russia. So it actually has some operations and some staff as part of its business model. And it's a really difficult position for Ford right now because they've been investing heavily into those plants. They want to build their presence in Eastern Europe. But clearly now with the geopolitical issues and the fact that we've got people like the big oil companies who are making statements that they will no longer deal with Russia, there's a lot of pressure on Ford to come out and make an announcement. So we're waiting to hear what they're going to say. But clearly, overall, this is going to be bad news for the vehicle manufacturers because Russia is an export market for them. It provides them with income. And if all of these guys are no longer dealing with Russia, then that will reduce the level of business they're doing and will reduce their profits. A number of sovereign wealth fund management businesses have come out and made statements that they will now be withdrawing all of their investments from Russia. Nobody wants to be seen to be associated with Russian companies or Russian sovereign debt. So the highest profile so far is the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and it has over $1.3 trillion invested into Russia and Russian businesses. Now that is a major amount of cash. So they will be divesting all of that over the next 3 to 6 months. So this is likely to continue across the board. We will see pension funds and states and various countries who have been giving money to Russia for the last 10 years or so, they will all be looking to withdraw from these situations. So this is really bad news for Russia because if you follow the channel, you'll know that a lot of countries that are emerging, they need overseas investment. So they invite in both companies to come in and open up plants and facilities and to help them grow their businesses, but also they want direct investment from countries. So they need that capital to come in to help them develop their economy. So if we have a point in time now where everybody is saying no more, we are exiting from Russia, this is going to have a massive damaging effect on the Russian economy because they'll no longer have access to foreign currency, which they will need, but they'll also no longer have any access to the knowledge and the understanding as to how to develop and build these businesses. And that's a really important part when you're growing your economy. It's not just about the cash, it's also about the information and the understanding as to how to go about building these businesses. The last thing I wanted to touch on today is social media and entertainment. So we've heard from a variety of the social media businesses, so Facebook, Instagram, Google, that they will be stopping all advertising from Russian-related businesses. So this is to stop information flow, and they're also cutting off access to some of the Russian news channels and other areas where Russia are putting out propaganda. So that's all good news from a social media point of view, but it's bad news from a profits point of view because all of these companies are paying these entities to advertise on their platforms. So again, staying away from the political discussion, the business impact of this is going to be negative for all of these companies because they will have less advertisers wanting to promote things on their sites. And on the entertainment side of things, we've heard that both Disney and Warner Brothers have suspended all theatrical releases of their movies for the foreseeable future. So the biggest profile one of those is The Batman that Warner Brothers are currently releasing. That was due to go on general release shortly in Russia, and that has now been pulled. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, when I first started posting these videos, we were talking just about governments and countries making decisions to try to hurt Russia. But what we're seeing now is the next level down. So we're seeing companies who have relationships with Russia starting to either close off those relationships, cancel their investments, or just no longer doing business with Russian companies. Now, the bottom line on all of this is that it means a reduction in trade. All of these companies will be doing less business because they are no longer dealing with a major counterparty. Now, it has a bigger impact on some businesses than other. So clearly the oil businesses will be hurt quite badly. They have big joint ventures and they have been working on the basis of developing those oil and natural gas fields for the next 20 or 30 years. And that will no longer be happening. So they will have to reassess their whole business model and reduce their projections going forward because they just won't have access to as much oil and gas as they wanted to. And it'll be similar for airline businesses. If you're an airline that provides a lot of services to and from Russia or Eastern Europe, then it's likely that you're going to be feeling the pain in the very short term. But it's not just the businesses that have the direct impact, it's also all businesses that are related to anything to do with Russia. So we will see in 2022 a reduction in the level of trade that happens because Russia is now banned from everything, and that will have a negative impact. And it's quite likely that we could see this trigger a global financial crisis. We've been sitting on the edge of a crisis for some time. We've got a lot of debt that has built up in all of the economies and a lot of companies all around the world that has been driven by COVID. We haven't cleared that debt. We haven't got away from that. We've got high levels of inflation all across the world. We've got real pressure on energy prices and food prices. And governments have been trying to introduce interest rate increases to bring back the prices down to an acceptable level. What's happening in Russia right now is going to drive up energy prices because the supply of oil is under question and we don't know what's happening with natural gas. So that is going to push inflation further, and it's likely that we will see governments having to increase interest rates faster and higher than they originally wanted to. So that combination is a recipe for a potential recession. And I think we're sitting right on the edge of that now. So if this conflict carries on for a long period of time, it will put increasing pressure on the world economy. And I think there is a very high likelihood that this could cause a recession during 2022. So hopefully you've enjoyed what I've said today. If you've liked the content, if you've liked the way I structure my videos and talk about things in a bit more detail and trying to give you some background as to what the real life impact of all of these decisions is, then please give me a thumbs up and also subscribe if you haven't done so already.